Libraries and archives started to disappear, so people started to hustle to retain any sense of history and culture. These became unauthorized mixtapes. Trying to imagine what the archives might have been like or looking ahead to the future was deemed to be dangerous behavior and actively policed by corrective rhetoric and propaganda. For them, history must remain rootless and strict controls over how stories could be told. This led to the growth of underground movements, hustlers who searched for fragments of histories and stories that were discarded or purposely hidden. As she listened to the tape, she heard about an ambitious plan for Muslim artists and thinkers to tell their stories on their own terms, unregulated and militant in their desire to create their own communities and future. Why did they keep saying there was no such thing as an archive? We had no genealogy, but here was a record of all the accepted rhyming schemes being broken. Who will look after our memory? The memory of how we were riffing and rhyming to the promise of a new chapter written by us.
Event. Assalamu alaikum, hello and welcome everybody. I'm Nikki from Civic Square and I've got Shaheen with me. I'm hoping Shaheen will turn her camera on in a minute. Welcome Shaheen, assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us for this Beyond Books and MFest event with Sabeena Akhtar, Suhaiymah Manzoor-Khan, Sophie Williams and Hodan, Yusuf, editor and contributors from Cut from the Same Cloth. We're hosting this Beyond Books event today in collaboration with MFest. Some of you may be familiar with MFest, and just in case, for those of you who don't know, Shaheen, if you'll introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about MFest.
Hey everyone, assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you to everyone at Civic Square. So MFest is a multi-arts festival of Muslim knowledge and creativity, and it's programmed by the organisation Maslaha. We bring together artists, activists, thinkers, organisations and collectives to celebrate the collective power of diverse Muslim communities, connect with our roots and imagine thriving futures. You can read more about MFest and the wider programme at mfest.org, and of course Twitter and Instagram MFest UK. So upcoming events, we've got some really exciting things. We've got a writing workshop on hip hop and sci-fi writing with the incredible Amara Spence, which has sold out, but you can, of course it's going to sell out. Of course, but you can add your name to the wait list. And also really excitingly, we've got a conversation on food and land justice and its interconnections with faith, spirituality and public health on the 1st of July. And you can get your free tickets on our website. So this event in particular, really excited to host this this book launch for Cut from the Same Cloth. It's sponsored by Muslim Girls Fence from the Maslaha side, which is a Maslaha and British fencing project. So the project is all about facilitating safe spaces that centre the needs of Muslim women, but are open to all women, and combining physical activity, fencing, artistic creativity and conversation, but on our own terms and not in reaction to imposed stereotypes or racist politicians and media headlines, but there's space for that too. So current and upcoming MGF projects are focusing on the impacts of racism and Islamophobia on mental health and well-being. And we're releasing our first report on this in school settings in a few weeks. So if that's your field of work or you're interested at all, you can get in touch via our website. And also please do look out for the report. And we've also got a mini podcast series out at the moment called Reimagining Care. So you can find us at Maslaha on IG and Twitter and muslimgirlsfence.org. And that's all about us. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Shaheen. I'm just going to give a little introduction of why we're hosting Cut from the Same Cloth as a Beyond Books event. So we're hosting the event because these essays fit in, really well about what Beyond Books is. This book, let me grab a copy. If you haven't already got your copy, I suggest you do because it's a brilliant collection of essays. It's a book that was published by Unbound, and Unbound is a crowdfunding platform, and I'm not surprised that it kind of exceeded its target, and which not only demonstrated a need for these voices to be heard, but a need for authentic voices that are often looked or absent from the mainstream. Beyond Books acknowledges and treasures a space for reading, for lending, for purchasing, and for discussing what books are, what they've been, and what they could be to us. They bring forward voices that encourage and cultivate conversations, offering narratives and ideas informed by our identities, lived experiences and dreams. Beyond Books is a platform where books and other means of stories are used to democratise knowledge, imagination and enjoyment. We envisage Beyond Books will be the key to unlock the dream matter in all of us, strengthening our infrastructure to unleash the capacity to engage, to learn, to grow, and to delve into the many possibilities for ourselves and our places. At the heart of Beyond Books are conversations, as I mentioned earlier, conversations that shine a light on new voices. And today we share 4 of the 21 voices cut from the same cloth, which in their own unique and individual way share experiences of Muslim women on life in Britain today. I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the conversation today and some of the stories. I'm just going to be inviting Zoya to join us onto the screen now. And Zoya will be hosting the conversation. She's a painter, a DJ, and part of our regenerative economics team at Civic Square. She has so many reflections, provocations, and questions for our 4 guest writers today. And I tweeted earlier on this morning saying, I feel as though we need a festival just for this book because there's so much to unpack. And before I hand over to Zoya, we'll share in the chat a link to where you can buy a copy of Cut from the Same Cloth. It's from an independent bookseller. And on that note, Shaheen and I are going to turn our camera and audio off, and we'll invite our guest writers onto.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Shaheen. Hello, everyone. And so I'm Zoya. Part of the Civic Square team and going to be helping to facilitate this talk. Maybe we should all just introduce ourselves and just, I'll go along my camera. So Suhaiymah, Sophie, Sabeena and Hodan, if you want to just take turns to say hi.
Sure. Hi, assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Suhaiymah. I'm a writer and I'm very happy to be part of this amazing anthology, which I agree there could be a whole festival about. There's so many themes in it. So very excited to be here today.
Hi, assalamu alaikum. My name's Sophie. I'm really privileged and honoured to be here today and I'm looking forward to this event.
Hi, salam. I'm Hodan and happy to be here. Thank you.
Hi, assalamu alaikum everyone. I'm Sabeena and it was my absolute honour to edit this collection and work with all these brilliant women that cut from the same cloth.
Amazing, thank you everyone. So I guess my first question, starting with you, Sabeena, and then I guess open to everyone. How does it feel to see the book come together after the seeds of inception, which I think you were saying date back from 2017? How does it feel to see the book come together, published, on paper, in front of you? How has this experience been and what would you say it's taught you?
Oh, wow. I think Suhaiymah and Hodan haven't been part of it from the very beginning will agree that it feels amazing to finally have it, doesn't it, in our hands. And it was such a long journey. I think personally, I learned so much along the way and just the whole process. I think it's going to be a defining part of my life to be able to look back at this whole process and, what happened during it. So, yeah, for me personally, it feels so good, especially for it to, have been funded in Ramadan and then for us to receive the final copies in Ramadan. It felt, one of the other contributors, she sent me a message and said, Allah is with the patient. And, we've been patient and we've waited for this book. So for me, it feels amazing. I'm doing that.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And would you say it's opened up any new possibilities or any dreams for you? How has this experience been of being part of this mosaic of writers and perspectives coming together?
Well, for me as an editor, no, not really. I think, we're at the end of the day, we're still Muslim women talking about being comfortable in our religiosity, and that doesn't always sit well within the mainstream. So in terms of, opening us up to massive dreams or possibilities, I'm not sure about that. I did get commissioned to write an article for a well-known publication recently, and they said, write what you want. And I thought, wow, this is like creative freedom. This is not what I've had. So I wrote about Palestine, and then they sent it back to me and said, oh no, but not that. So I mean, some things are still the same, I think. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in.
I think this is something that's like come up as a theme that maybe we'll get into, about like the grey areas and the things that we feel comfortable talking about and the things that we don't feel like there's yet space to be able to speak about, and like the process that we're in and just recognizing it and surfacing it, and yeah, how we move forward and how we create the vision of where we want to be. So another theme that came up across the essays in different ways was feminism and what it means to be a Muslim woman across different spaces, as a mother, as a student, as a young person. So Suhaiymah, I wanted to ask you, because you really describe this journey of feminism and this like goal of equality. Like you go in thinking, oh, I want equality, and then you've just really honestly and transparently just talked about the different parts of that process, and that journey and that understanding and that deepening of understanding. So I was wondering if you wanted to maybe talk about your relationship with like feminism, and maybe some of the blind spots or the disillusionments.
Sure. Yeah. I think I definitely don't think I have like a conclusive like comment to make. Even I'm sure like my like relationship to what feminism is will always change. But I think in the essay that I wrote for this collection, I was trying to capture the sort of journey that I'd gone on, where, as you said, like I think you know, when I was 18, 19, starting university, I kind of understood feminism in this framework of like, yeah, you know, like I see men in the world around me doing things that I'm not allowed to do. I want to do those things. And it was very straightforward. And I think what kind of changed my relationship to feminism was feminism itself, and the way that I kind of interacted with, you know, particularly white women, and the ways that their imaginations of who women are didn't ever include us, me, women of color in general, and many other women and people. So I think that to me was a wake-up call, and I think I began to realize also in the context that I was in, that I was never being read as a woman. I was being read as a Muslim, and then woman was like this addition. And I think that's why this anthology is also really important, because I think the particular intersection that Muslim women sit at, and obviously there's so many different racialized experiences of that as well, and visibilities that like some of us are more and less visible, I think just makes it that I think that, you know, we deserve more theorizing around like what it means to be a Muslim woman, because I think we just slip off the radar when it's like talking about, oh, women's rights, because nobody's really thinking about Muslim women, and if they are, we're a footnote to Muslim men. And I think what I mean by that is that, sorry, to circle back to the question, I think when I was like, okay, I'm being perceived as a Muslim woman, let me like, you know, I got much more invested and involved in it, like anti-racist politics, and we're thinking about Islamophobia. But even then I realized that a lot of that work really centered Muslim men and men of color. And it was very much about, you know, how they are over-policed and how they are, and all of these things which are valid and I care about and, you know, want to be safer. But at the same time, again, it was like, oh, so we're always sort of next in the line. So I think, yeah, I definitely don't sort of, I don't go around any, I think there was a point in my life where I was like, intersectional feminism, this is the framework to look at things, because it was helping me to understand a lot in the world. I think now where I'm at, I'm much more dubious about what feminism really means for somebody like me. And I think I'm much more interested in aligning myself with justice, I think, and I feel like Islam provides a really helpful framework to just think about, okay, justice is something that is really central and kind of required of us. So yeah, I think, and if and where feminism can align with that, and kind of people who are in solidarity with that as feminists can see it in a complicated way, then that works for me. But otherwise, I think I definitely steer away from like words and labels nowadays, which maybe is also just kind of a response to the ways that lots of these labels are also co-opted nowadays. And I think many, you know, every capitalist corporation is feminist now too, as they exploit their sweatshop laborers in Bangladesh. So, you know, so yeah. But yeah, that's just some thoughts, but there's loads that could be said, I'm sure.
Thank you for sharing. I wonder if anybody else has anything they'd like to share on this theme. It's also cool if not. Yeah, so while you were talking, I was just thinking like, it's interesting going from this space of like labels and like language as a quite a restrictive tool. And I think when we name something as this is this, and then like we can get so caught up in the language and this whole like politics of like what that might mean or look like. And like the reason I resonated as well so much with this like discussion of feminism is because it resonated with some of my own experiences, wherein like some of those like sort of supposed like liberation circles became self-congratulatory and just like perpetuated further cycles of harm without any accountability or without, I guess, looking at a bigger picture. And so I'm really interested in how like spirituality and the shift to centering Islam and centering God and centering faith can help us move towards liberation. So I wonder like if anyone has anything, like any journey or story or anything they'd like to share about this sort of transition to faith as a space of liberation.
I'd be interested to ask Sabeena if I could, like, on the note of on this collection and on that question, like, did you imagine people would be writing about, like, I feel like Islam in the collection is obviously very present. That's kind of obvious thing to say, but I think in a way, in a more than just like we are Muslim women, like people's Islam really mattered to them, and I don't know if that was something you anticipated or not, and I don't know if I could sort of like flip that question onto you in that way, because I'm just interested when Zoya said that.
I think, yeah, in part that's what I wanted to capture. That's what I always, as a reader, felt like I never, there was a distancing between Islam, what's an acceptable Muslim woman in the books that you read, what's a woman who's accepted in the mainstream. It's one that's distanced herself from religion. And that's not the Muslim community that I know and love. That's not the people that I've grown up with. We invoke Allah several times a day. We're constantly, we're engaged. We're so it's not even engaged. Islam is just a part of us, isn't it? It's just a part of who we are. And so I didn't ever envision that that you could separate the two. You could separate our spirituality from what we were writing. Yeah, so for me, absolutely, it was fundamental to the collection.
Yeah, and I think personally what came across for me when I read the different essays was that it was an Islam that we spoke about, knowing that we were speaking to other people who also were of faith, or Muslim in particular. I don't think, and that I was like pleasantly surprised to read that, because often there's the stuff you think, and then when you're presented with the opportunity to write, especially in the context that we live in Britain, there's the temptation or the expectation to write to another audience, for another audience, which is predominantly white, middle class, not Muslim, and that you then have to explain yourself and you have to explain your everything. And here we are just writing this book. And I think I will stand corrected if it might have been Bell Hooks who spoke about the most powerful work that she wrote was when she wrote work that was for women and people who were like her. So when you look at your communities and you write for your community. So I know that I'm not going to explain anything in that essay to someone who doesn't already understand the subtext and the things, the context, and no amount of glossary is going to help them. And that's fine. And that is fine. And I think it's important to get to that liberatory stage of saying not everything is for the outside. Sometimes we write for ourselves and sometimes we speak to each other. And that too is liberatory.
Yeah, like there's so much in like existing within like a public, especially like arts space, and like you experience it in a lot of galleries, this whole framework of white gaze and this like way that things have been conformed or like changed or contrived, like to try and fit and appropriate it to white gaze. And yeah, even in the way a lot of like interviews and like what you'll see in the news and the buzzwords, which like I sort of picked up in some of what you wrote, Sophie, in your essay about like just seeing these like, you know, buzzwords around Islam like thrown around in the media without like meaningful discourse. And yeah, I guess my question was sort of relating to this whole like thing of like when you see like things like that being taken out of proportion and like in the news and change, their shape has changed. Sorry, I'm finding it so hard to get my words out. But like, yeah, how do you navigate your own well-being when that happens? Basically, it's like this is like your narrative that you have like the ability to pen yourself, and that is like your space and your liberation is in just like creating your art. And when you see things distorted in the world around you, like I just can't watch the news these days because I just turn it on and just hear agenda, and then switch it off because I'm like, my brain doesn't want this. So I'm wondering like how you navigate that and how you navigate like I guess it's like internal work first and foremost, but yeah, just what your feelings are around seeing these like shape-shifted narratives around us about what Islam is and how we bring ourselves up in this climate and how we bring our children up in this climate.
Yeah, I'm still very new to this. I only converted, I think it was about 14 years ago. And so I went from this place of extreme white privilege, white middle class privilege, to something different. And I'm still finding my way. I'm still trying to, you know, figure out how to keep myself, my family safe. So I don't have any answers at all to, you know, where do we find a safe space? You know, where can we talk openly? I don't have any answers to that. That said, it was really refreshing to be asked to write about whatever I wanted. And I remember being really surprised after I sent the essay to Sabeena, and I expected her to, you know, say, yeah, this won't do. We can't publish this. I was really surprised that she said, yeah, that's fine. So, you know, this was a new experience for me, speaking the truth and not having it rejected.
Can I just add as well, Zoya? It's interesting that you asked that, and a few people have picked up on that in the collection about finding space to heal. And somebody messaged me and asked me, "Is that the next step after this collection? Are you going to set up a place? Are you going to set up, you know, some kind of network for Muslim women to gather and heal?" And so, I mean, I didn't even think about how that particular thing would resonate, you know, how we must all be feeling that we need that space because of, you know, how we just always see negative things. In terms of keeping families and children safe, you know, in my essay, I wrote a really personal piece, which I ummed and ahed about sharing. And, you know, it's really hard. You know, I'm a mum of 4, and, you know, every day you know, when something happens in the school playground, or, you know, when something happens in the news, for example, like we've seen in Palestine and how schools react to that, you have to ask yourself, how do I keep my child safe? You know, do we talk about this thing? Do we engage? After the New Zealand attacks, it's, you know, do I send them off to school happy? Do I tell them when they come home? Will someone else tell them? So I think for a lot of Muslim mums in particular, it's a real fine balancing act, and it's just taking each day as it comes sometimes. I don't know if Suhaiymah or Hodan, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, it's hard. I think I was also surprised to find that the theme that was running through the book was that we are all tired and we are all feeling very, very unsafe and frustrated in the situations that are thrust upon us. as a community, no matter what the background. It seemed to be like, and so in a way, this book in and of itself provided a little bit of a pressure release for people to be able to say that, and to have that creative freedom to say that I can write about what I need to write about now. And I know time has lapsed since we submitted those essays. A lot has changed. And, you know, we were saying before that we kind of feel like we've aged in ways that maybe the short amount of time that it has been wouldn't have done, because a lot has happened in the world and we're all still in a pandemic. So much has changed, and the issues of the safety of being particularly visible Muslim women, all of those things still are pertinent. And I don't think that it's something that we can magic away, and no matter what, you know, we set up or do, it's not gonna, the world needs to change for us to feel safe. It's not something that we can just create in a little corner of there, because as soon as we step out of that little safe corner, the rest of the world is still as it was and business as usual. So I think it's a conversation starter, and it's nice to have had that opportunity for people to speak. But everywhere you go, you find that even in the process of writing this book, you'll find that there's obstacles. Like just last week, I found out that when we were doing the beginning, the crowdfunder and everything else with the Unbound, some of the things that people were doing was donating time or donating postcards and photography and things, and as the pledge levels. So different authors were, you know, putting up some of their skill, as it were. And I donated some poetry on the condition that they put a copyright symbol on my poetry. And I got my set in the post the other day to find that it wasn't there. And it was extremely frustrating, because I did contact them and I'm still waiting, and I gave them time and they didn't respond. So this is me giving them time the whole week to respond, and they haven't. And I CC'd you in, Sabeena, and so I know you're aware of this. This is not news to you. So, and thank you for the support. But it's things like that, you know, that here you are, you claim to be publishing a book on, you know, with this many Muslim women writing and talking about their lives. And if you read half of the essays, you know that this world is not exactly a joyride for the rest of us. And then you're going to disrespect people with their intellectual property in the process. It's not acceptable. And so that's what I'm saying. The fight goes on no matter what. Even in these spaces that we've created, we're still behind the scenes. There's so many things that people are not aware of. And the struggle continues, and it's exhausting. It just is.
Yeah, I think there was a lot behind the scenes, not necessarily with the publisher, but just behind the scenes in our journey to publication. You're right that there was loads of obstacles. I think they have responded, but we'll take that offline afterwards.
Not to me. Not to
you. Oh, maybe not. Maybe it was just to me. But yeah, I mean, you know, we have faced a lot of obstacles. I mean, I think we continue to, even, you know, how the book is marketed, how booksellers are reacting to it. I noticed that it's in the bookstores that it's in, you know, it's in academic. It's in the academic spaces, you know, or it's in social science, sociology, rather than, you know, this was just our kind of, you know, it's just an anthology of, you know, Muslim women creatives writing their pieces. So unfortunately, I think, yeah, we have faced obstacles and we will continue to. But I will say that, you know, we had a fantastic commissioning editor, Joelle, who really supported me behind the scenes and my efforts to try and make the book as you know, as much as a safe space as I could for the contributors. Yeah, it's an ongoing battle, isn't it, for Muslim women?
It feels like the interconnections and the relations between, like, on the micro level, is kind of like what nurtures the heart and the soul and like allows us to keep going in a way. Like, it's those small, like, it's like the light that sort of like keeps you going. Like when I think back to like living in East Germany and it was quite an Islamophobic climate, and I just remember, like, for all the like people that spewed hatred and like racism, there were like a couple golden people that just kept me going on my day-to-day, just a reminder like that there is good and that there is reason to carry on, and there's people that resonate and that we can work with. And I think just like nurturing those relationships from the ground level is something that gives me a lot of hope. I guess on that sort of note, so something that I learned while I was there, so I was like not served at a post office basically. This person working at the post office was just like, "What's your name?" And then I said my name, and I think she heard like Ahmed, and she saw my brown face, and she was just like, refused to serve me basically. And I had this whole thing, and like I called my mom, like I didn't know what to do. I was just like in a really strange state of mind. And then my brother said something to me. He was like, "Zoya, like in these situations, you need to do something so that it feels like in some way you've resolved or you've released the energy." And then I went back and then I spoke to her and I said what I needed to say. And I think in some way that helped me feel like I was able to not resolve it, but to like release that energy so that it wasn't harboring inside me and like turning into something, you know, that it didn't need to. So a way of like enacting it so that, you know, I don't just take the hatred, but I'm able to like, you know, reflect something back or respond in a way. And that was a massive like coping mechanism for me. And I think it's not always easy to know how to respond in the moment. So like it's a very personal question, but I wonder if like there's any like learnings or like in your journey, like how you've learned to like navigate in the moment or like keep your spirit up or like remember God or like anything that like helps you like in the moment or like advice you'd give to your younger self.
I think I would say nurture the relationships that are important to you. And remind yourself that you are more than what is projected onto you, that you are a soul that Allah chose to put on this planet and, you know, made that decision so that you could be here and exist, to honor the people around you who have, like you said, when you were living in East Germany, you were confronted with so many other obstacles, but then there were people who gave you respite and reminded you of kindness and things like that. So remember that those people, you know, often they're biological. So family, you know, I think my mom is watching today. So I think I have to say salam hoya. I hope you're watching anyway. So yeah, your family, and the friends that are family that you create for yourself. I think that's also equally important. Sometimes we forget that that we can make homes outside of the biological frameworks that we were born into that are as nourishing and as beautiful as any other, you know, family. And I think those things, to root yourself in who you are and to remember that, and to remember that this is a journey in and of itself as well, that this isn't the end for us. If you know, as Muslims, this isn't the end. There is another journey. For like so much has happened, like we were saying before, that when last December I lost my father, Allah yarhamu, and if I'm honest, I don't think I've processed the grief really, and I don't think many of us have, because of everything that's been happening, like just locked in. But I knew he knew about the book, and I knew that he supported, like, you know, I was looking forward to holding a copy of this book and reading my essay. So when I got my copy, I took it to the cemetery, and sorry, I took the pink cover off because, like, no, I couldn't. So I just took the hardback like that when I got to my car and stood with everyone else reading Quran over their loved ones. And I was reading my essay to my dad, and he was the first person I shared it with, because in his resting place, in the hope that he will hear and he will know that the thing you supported and rooted for, that it's there. So I think things like that, you know, like it can be moments. It doesn't have to be a whole entire thing. It can be a moment of, you know, having my mom's cooking, which is the best cooking in the whole world, argue with your mother's because, you know, my mom's food's the best. So, and, you know, just things like that, taking the time out, having a phone call with a friend or a voice note, just venting. If you've had a really rough something or another, venting with someone and just saying, look, you don't need to respond, but this is what's going on for me. and just offloading, just to kind of be in touch with our humanity and to remember that, like I said at the beginning, that we are more than what is projected onto us. We're these souls who happen to live in these, you know, female Muslim, you know, kind of visibly Muslim bodies that exist in this world. But ultimately, we are a soul that is on a journey. And this is one place that we stop. And hopefully in the, you know, when we move on, that our journey will be, our station will be one that reflects the journey we had here, that we do our best. Projected on, I think it's also important to not project our own issues onto other people. So because sometimes, like, it's easy to get in the thing of I'm in a minoritized community, I'm someone who is victimized in the society that I live in, and then forget that also we also have agency and power, and sometimes we can too cause harm on people who are further marginalized than ourselves or don't have the same experiences that we have. And I think, and power dynamics as well, like we might hold a position of power, it might be a parent, it might be an older sibling or an auntie or someone too, and remember that the people who we interact with are also souls on a journey, and we should honor and respect everybody regardless of their background and demographic. And I think those remembering both our responsibility and our essence helps me anyway keep me rooted.
That was really beautiful, and it just made me think about I guess to answer the question, Zoya, as well. I feel like one of the things, and maybe this is also why the book felt quite significant, is I think knowing there are people who see you truly for who you are and how you need to be seen. And I think as I'm growing older, that I noticed that, you know, actually there's very few people that will see you in the ways that you need to be seen, and there are very few people you will probably see also in the ways that they need to be seen. But actually that's a really important thing. And I think particularly as we are so hyper visible and we're always seen and being seen, I think it can really drain you and be quite emotionally exhausting. And so to then have people who are not just seeing you with the eyes, but seeing you with the heart, right? And I think that's something really special. And I think also, you know, that goes back to this reminder that it is only Allah who truly does see us, right? Like, and we kind of, it's only in the sight of Allah that we need to worry. And I think that in those moments when, say, like something is happening immediately, I'm personally really rubbish at, like, I process things years late. I'm not very, but I think that's also a survival mechanism. And I think actually what I'm trying to learn to do is to also honor the ways that my mind protects me, and to not kind of berate myself and be like, oh, like I don't have any good coping mechanism. It's like actually everything that we do is a type of coping mechanism. And I think it's easy to build a narrative of like, I don't know, like, oh, I repress everything, haha. It's like, actually, that's well done to your body for trying to protect you. There are reasons that you respond to situations in the way that you do. And I guess for a lot of us, we also have to learn to just be really generous to ourselves. And I think as Muslim women, we've learned to be very generous to many other people in the world around us. And I think it can be so against your instinct to kind of extend that generosity to yourself. But I think that's why then you also kind of need one another, I think, to see one another and remind one another that, you know, give yourself the advice you would give someone else, I suppose, which may be a bit cheesy, but I think it's actually very important.
Thank you both so much for sharing. Hodan, I wanted to ask you a question related to something related to the title of your essay, and there was two questions. One was around privilege being a currency, and how you think this connects with spirituality and with God, and like what is our responsibility, you know, if privilege is a currency, like what does that mean for us, and from like a spiritual lens?
Oh, that's a good question. From a spiritual lens, privilege, spend it wisely. You know, if it's a currency, then in the same way that we are obligated to give zakah or encouraged to give sadaqah of ourselves, then if you have something that is, and this is separate to the conversation about white privilege and what that specifically means. So I don't want anyone listening thinking that that's what I'm talking about. This is just the idea that you can have a social advantage over other members of the community, rightly or wrongly. And the context that I mentioned those things was in the context of like fleeing civil war and kind of absolute survival, and cashing in your privilege in order to survive was the context that I think I speak about it in the essay, if I remember. But spiritually, like I said, I think like as a currency. So if Allah has given you or put you in a place, in a position that however you ended up there, you are now someone who holds the privilege of X, Y, or Z. You are now in receipt of a blessing of some kind. Then it is an obligation to use that currency very, very wisely. Was there another part to the question that I've forgotten?
I wonder if there's another question to do with your essay, but I wonder if anybody else, wants to say anything.
Kind of bounce really quickly off that. I love that framing, and I think about the fact that I feel like Islam is very like redistributive as well. So I think if we have to redistribute our wealth to kind of benefit the most marginalized, surely we also have to redistribute, knowledge and other kind. I think it's also responsibility as well, I guess, and that thing that you're saying about spending it wisely and thinking like I'm accountable also for this thing that I now have. Like, I think it should kind of weigh on our minds a little bit as well and make us a bit worried. Like, okay, what am I actually doing with that? But yeah, so I really like that framing. Thanks, Hodan.
And my other question about your essay was to do with the title and like what the symbolism of exhale means for you, or like what does it mean for us to exhale?
I think it's something that's I mean, the Arabic linguists amongst us will probably correct me for this, but if I'm not mistaken, the word for soul is also connected to the word for breath in Arabic, and it's just nafs, and all of this is one. And when we are given life, it is a breath that that is put in us, that the initiation of life from a Islamic theological perspective. And I think the idea that this breath can then be stifled because of oppressions or austerity in some shape or form is unnatural. That we should have we're made of a breath. Our essence is breathing, and therefore we should have the capacity and the space around us, physical or metaphorical, to be able to take those breaths and to be able to live a life that is not hindered by other people's resentment of your existence and other people's hellbound on destroying you in some capacity, whether it's just to keep you subjugated or to annihilate you entirely. That it's so crucial to be able to make those, who gets to breathe as well is another question. Who gets to breathe in the society that we live in? Who gets to breathe in the world that we live in? Who gets to breathe the loudest? Who gets to breathe, unaided? Who gets assistance when they cannot breathe? Because and I think with COVID and everything that's been happening in the last 15, 14 months, it makes that even more poignant for me. So I think it's just a wider conversation. And I think someone, was it Nikki, who said that this online about the questions and everything, this discussion could actually be a bunch of festivals like in and of itself. So we could just do one on breath, like, sign me up. So it's yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it's like so much more than I'd imagined. And I was just really inspired to see the word exhale, because like a lot of the sort of like healing sort of spaces, particularly for like QT-POC people that I've been involved in, have like talked about breathing as just like such a core essence of like healing. And yeah, so when I saw exhale, I thought like, wow, like that's that release of the breath, and the breath like being life source and being one of those, ordinary reminders of Allah's presence in the day-to-day. It's like we don't control this this is just this is working through us, and
absolutely. And I just wanted to add that throughout the essay, which is a lot of places and junctures of life and examples and anecdotes where that has been interrupted, where breathing has been interrupted. And so the idea is not just exhaling, it's the idea that some of us are actually waiting to fully exhale, and that has not happened. And connecting to the theme of that, Sabeena, you said came through all the other most of the other essays, at least, that we in some capacity, shape or form are waiting, that there is this waiting to, when will we breathe? When will this come? And I think when we connect it to our spirituality, yes, there is an afterlife, and talked about this before, as Muslims, we believe this. There's also the issue of we have a right to breathe here too. We have a right for, the justice that, Suhaiymah, you were mentioning earlier. We have a right for the justice to be distributed along, amongst all of us, and for all of us to be able to breathe. And it is unfair and unjust that some of us have to hold our breath.
Thank you so much, Hodan. And I wondered, Sophie, your essay talks a lot about therapy spaces, and I guess the difficulty that comes when even so-called safer spaces turn out to feel really unsafe, and what that means where do we get to take our heartache? Where do we get to share? Where do we get to feel that safety? I wonder if there's any reflections on what therapy, your experience essentially, and what you imagine or wish there could have been instead. I really resonated with what you wrote about sort of the mental health system and your experiences within that.
Like I said a few minutes ago, I don't have any of the answers. I don't see that there are any safe spaces for Muslim women in the UK, aside from a woman's own home and her close social circle, people that she trusts. That there are no safe spaces. Therapy is not a safe space. The doctor's room is not a safe space. You always have to be thinking, how is the other person seeing me? How is he viewing me through the prevent lens? Can I say this? Is it safe to say this? Can this be reported? Is this a red flag? If I want my eldest daughter, she's 13 now, and she needed therapy, and I ended up going private to a Muslim therapist because, I don't feel safe. The idea of my daughter talking to an NHS therapist. She needs to be able to talk freely about whatever's bothering her. And therapy is not that safe space. The doctor's waiting room also is not a safe space. Talking to the doctor, they're always seeing us through, seeing us as Muslim women first and foremost, as Muslims. And in my case, they're seeing ISIS, because that is the image that has been burnt into their brains by tabloid headlines. I don't know of any safe spaces. The masjid should be a safe space. I'm told it's not. I don't even go anymore. I don't even try. I know that my home is a safe space, and I don't go beyond that very much. Even on social media, there's always self-censoring. It starts off by being your personal journal, and you talk about everything on your minds, and you very quickly realize, no, this is not safe either. You have to be careful. Your views can be picked up by anyone and screenshotted and shared with everyone. Oh, look, she said something about Palestine, she must be anti-Semitic. She said something about Syria, she must be pro-ISIS. Wherever we try to talk, there are people there trying to find labels, harmful, dangerous labels to stick on us. I hope that my sisters can correct me and that I'm wrong, but I don't know of any safe spaces in the UK.
No, I would totally agree with that, Sophie. And I would even go so far as to add, even for lots of Muslim women, unfortunately, the home is not a safe space either.
That's very true. I forgot.
Yeah. No. So I think it's really hard. It's hard, and I've been thinking about safe spaces, and I saw that one of the questions, perhaps I'm answering this prematurely, was about how I created a safe space, and perhaps naively or wrongly of me, I didn't I thought just giving editorial creative freedom was enough, was, you know, a broad enough kind of scope for women to freely express themselves. And then as I began editing, I realized, you know, even, you know, amongst Muslim women, we're self-censoring. And I thought, you know what, in a way, I understand why it happens, and I don't mind that within the collection, because actually, you know, there's subtext there for all of us to read, all of the Muslim women who know, and, you know, we can all, and the ones that also even know each other personally, we can all see and read behind, you know, some of the things that are left out. So I think sometimes for Muslim women, it's in those quiet spaces, it's in those silences, it's in the things left unsaid as well, that we can catch our breath sometimes.
I think also, can I just add as well, I think it's important to frame this as well, in the sense that, you know, it's not just like that it's a very concerted effort basically for us to not have those spaces. It's not just like mean-spirited, you know, people, and like obviously, as Sophie was saying, prevent policy, but even it's not even just like, oh, politicians. I think Muslim women, I truly feel we're simultaneously the targets and the collateral of, like, you know, a global industrial complex of security wherein our responses and our experiences are just evidence that bolster it further and that just create more profit. And so in a way, like, I feel like there's a really intimate violence there as well, where it's like the violence that we experience, that lack of safety that we experience, is also just used as like further evidence and further proof and further to demonstrate like these things are needed to deal with these people. And actually we become more of a problem the less of a safe space we have, right? Because it's like, well, where are they? So like, you know, who are they talking to? You know, if you're not, so if you say you're not tweeting about it and you're not going to the therapist about it and you're just staying at home, then your home is a huge problem place. Like, that's a place we also need to be surveilling. And I think, yeah, I just think it becomes like a really, it's a sort of like a spiral that we are just sort of sitting in the middle of. And I think, yeah, I think it's also a question of like, what is safety? What does that really mean to be safe? And I think as well, it can't really be, I think you can't be safe as an individual. You can only be safe as in community and collectivity. And so I think there's also that element. And when you read the book as well, I feel like, you know, even though you or I personally haven't experienced all the things that everyone in each chapter is experiencing, I think it creates that communal PTSD, right? Like you're also carrying the experience of your sister on your back, and you're also going outside and you're thinking that thing that happened to her could happen to me. And so there's that sort of collective trauma that, you know, what do you do to go, like, how do you heal that as well? It's not, we're not just all individual, you know, like even if amazing therapists exist and we all got to go, like, that's what Hodan said, like the world is what needs to change. And I think, yes, that it's the world is not safe for most people, but I think Muslim women do, there's like this really heightened level of collateral and targeting that we simultaneously experience.
And I think also there's a lot of gaslighting that we experience as Muslim women. Whoever we try to talk to about our issues, you know, the first reaction is nearly always gaslighting, even from other Muslims. Oh, you know, it's not so bad, or, you know, just change the way you dress, or just, you know, go out with a mahram, for example. From our own communities as well as from outside the communities, from my own family, my biological family. Again, therapists, the response to "I'm scared" is always, "Oh, you've got nothing to be scared about. You're just oversensitive. You've got nothing to worry about. This is a safe country. This is a civilized country. People here aren't racist. This is the least racist country in Europe. Islamophobia isn't real." You know, whenever we try to share our experiences, whoever we share them with, the first response is always gaslighting.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important that, you know, Sabeena, that you did this project, and, you know, Joelle for commissioning it. Thank you, because it is, women are going to pick up, you know, this book, and sisters who we've never met and will never meet will read each of our experiences and each of our essays and say, that's what I've been dealing with. I'm not alone. So that's what happened. Or when I sat in a therapy session and this person said this, or when I was walking down the street with my children and experienced this horrible incident, you know, in front of her, this is my experience. And I think and then not, like you said, Suhaiymah, not being alone, the idea that that book then it becomes a conduit to a sense of community, that people will see their experiences reflected back at them, or they'll see the experience of their sister, their cousin, or the person they gaslit. You know, they'll be like, oh, that, and you could have just done this, and then they'll pick up an essay that someone has articulated exactly what that person who was frustrated, who was telling them what they experienced, has said, and they'll see that there's a mirrored experience here. So I think these are the small things, because they're not small. They might be physically like on the scale of the universe, but these are the things that change, that create, you know, the spaces for change to happen. And I think that's, you know, that's never ever like undermine any of these things that we do. And I think that's fantastic. This project has provided that, and I thank you.
Thank you. And just to add on to that, I from what you were saying as well about recognizing our privileges, I have been overwhelmed with messages from sisters in Denmark, Switzerland and France on my social media saying, thank you for writing this book. We'd never get a book like this published where we are. So that for me has been, you know, I thought this was perhaps maybe a uniquely British thing, you know, some experience for some of us, but to see that it's both, you know, sobering and also really makes you grateful, I think. Sorry, Zoya, we digressed there.
No, that was beautiful. Like, I welcome more of, like, yeah. And I was just listening and thinking, do you know what, that's exactly how I experienced this book as well, and just reading all the different essays that I've had chance to read so far. And there's so many that I haven't read that look brilliant that I'm excited to get into. And there's just so many things that resonate, and so many things that you might feel in ordinary life that you experience in isolation, or, you know, you might not have a space to unearth things. And for each of you as writers to have been so like heartfelt, like to have like written with your heart in like whichever capacity you did, because it resonates with the hearts of readers, and it helps people navigate what they're doing. And it is really like, I love what you said about the small. Small is a word that just minimizes impact, but it's the things that create those ripples, and those ripples then like create something that you know that can change things. And like on that note of like change and sparking change and like shifting things, I wondered like if you have any like reflections on like education. There's a brilliant essay, I think it's the second essay, and it mentions like the hidden curriculum, what we're not taught at school, and I wondered like what role you feel education plays in this.
I think that's a big question. That I mean, that particular essay is, you know, more to do with Asha's experience as growing up as, you know, a black girl in, you know, a country where she's taught whitewashed history. So I can't speak to that particular experience, but in terms of, you know, I think education and where we're at now, obviously, you know, there's different facets to it. So in my mind as a mum right now, what I'm thinking about education and what I'm thinking about is prevent. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that we're facing right now. And so part of our Islamic education for me as a Muslim mum is making sure that my family, my kids, my community are aware of the dangers of prevent and what can trigger it, and, you know, how to protect themselves against that. And I'm sure for all of us, there's different, you know, there's different aspects of education that we're focusing on, or we need to focus on right now in particular. Suhaiymah, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I don't know, there's like, yeah, as you said, there's so many sort of thoughts popping into my mind on the question, on your open-ended questions of education. I think one thing that I do think, like when I reflect on my own kind of self, I just think that so much of the most important education that I've ever had has always been outside of institutions of education, has always been, you know, I think particularly like from other women and like intergenerational, very much like, you know, grandmothers and elders and aunties. And I think a lot of the stuff we've talked about in this conversation around survival and kind of like, you know, looking after yourself or like healing and moving and building collectivity is definitely, I feel like that stuff feels really important, even like also in the context you're talking about, Sabeena, in the sense that whilst all of the kind of institutional education that we are receiving is like we're just deemed as criminals and potential threats, and we're not, you know, we're not experiencing those institutions as sources of learning or sources of care. I think in that context, we also need to be thinking about like, okay, you know, like I think Sophie, the question you raised about the masjid earlier, like what I feel like the mosque there's so much potential for what the mosque could be and could have been and has been in the very, very, very distant past. But I think, yeah, when I think about education, I just think like school is not, we all know, I feel like we all know school is not the place, like universities are not the place where we're going to become the people we want to become. And also as Muslims, like I think there's such a violent secularism that kind of is just embedded in the institutions we're in, that, you know, I think as a young person, or at least I'll speak for myself, you know, it's just like the worst thing you can do is believe in God. Like that's like truly like that's the antithesis of being intelligent. That's the antithesis of being critical, thoughtful. And I think I had to do so much unlearning to really be in a place where I'm in now. And inshallah, there's much more to unlearn. But I think, yeah, I just think that on every count, whether it's like you're not going to be taught your history, you're not going to be taught your languages, you're not going to be taught your culture, you're not going to be your paradigm of existence doesn't exist. You understand yourself as a soul doesn't exist. So I think, you know, talk about gaslighting, like you kind of 18 years you're going to be gaslit. Like, well, let's make that say 21. Like I just think when we kind of, I feel like what's exciting to me and what I kind of want to think about more is like, yeah, what spaces are we able to actually, and it doesn't have to be spaces physically, but also like how are we able to kind of nurture different ways of thinking for one another and kind of raise questions for one another, because that also is education. And that also, yeah, I think being less didactic and letting people ask questions. And I think a lot of that stuff, sorry, I'll finish in a second, a lot of that stuff has also seeped into how we approach Islam as well, that like I think there's not a lot of space to grow and ask questions because we perhaps are so afraid of the responses of the circumstances we're in that we feel like we've got to, like, you need to just know XYZ thing, you need to have the hadith to back it up, and that's it, and that's the extent of the knowledge you need, because it's very reactionary and defensive, and you really need to just have it to prove that Islam says X and doesn't say Y. And I kind of think, what would it be like for us to learn about Islam on our own terms? What would it be like for us to just like ask the questions we want to ask, not like, what are women's rights in Islam? Because we've been told women do not have, like, what kind of questions we actually want to ask? I mean, maybe that would be one, but like, how would we ask it? And yeah, so sorry, that's just more of like a reflection on the concept of education. But I think there's so many spaces and places to go.
And I just want to add that sometimes when we find ourselves in these situations and kind of questions like that are posed to us, or we find ourselves in like as parents or in positions of teaching, etc., that we have to now come up with the answers from scratch. And there's a pressure almost to forget that there is a legacy before us, that we had people who did this. You know, we had parents and grandparents and uncles and relatives and great-grandparents who came to this country, who dealt with a lot, who also had their own, you know, who were literally fighting fascists in the streets of this country, who were dealing with so much else, as well as having to raise their kids as second or third generation immigrant communities, visibly Black and brown immigrant communities. So I think it's important sometimes to take a breath and look, no pun intended, to look back at what our parents, like I remember coming back from school and my mother just casually going, so what did you learn in school today? And if there was something like, you know, that didn't sit right with the things that it would be actively challenged. She would actively challenge it. And same with my father. And if there was something really bang out of order, they would turn up at school. My dad would turn up at school and have words with the teacher if they treated you in a way that reflected the education, i.e. if someone was racist to you in school, for instance, you know, and it was not this issue of just take it and just allow it as teacher. And no. It was being an assertive parent and being an assertive, responsible person and being involved. And I think a lot of your essay talks a lot about these kind of things, Sophie, and it was touching to read that and see that, you know, you're always fighting the corner of your children and for their identity, and to assert that they have support. And in the same way, I think when they come home, to look at the things that our parents and our grandparents did that have got us here, because somehow we're still here, you know, somehow, you know, we're still here as communities, thanks to all the efforts of our, you know, grandmas and our mothers and our aunties and people who, you know, who we wrote this for, you know, who we did this for. These are the people who allowed us. They walked so we could run. So they did all of these things. And I think to look back and say, what kind of tactics did they do? Buying supplementary books, you know, like you were saying, Suhaiymah, that a lot of the stuff, you know, we can go to prestigious universities and still come out having learned more outside of that building than inside it. So supplementing your children with books that weekend schools, books that are, and not just children, I mean, just like our communities, with literature and things that do give us, you know, the confidence and build our young people, and show, like for myself as a Black person, to again sharing the sentiments of Asha in the book, in the essay that she wrote, not seeing yourself in the history, having your Black history condensed to just certain aspects of Black history, certain events that took place, and just deleting everything else. And the irony is that they're teaching us, misteaching us our history, or erasing our history, using the very language and the numbers and the algebra and everything else that was, in essence, as a result of an Islamic civilization. That, you know, so, sir, you could really not do this algebra without Islam, but it's me as a Muslim you want to discriminate against in the class. It doesn't. And if your kid walks into the school knowing that, if your younger sister, if your family, if you yourself walk in, there's a certain level of pride that you yourself and your family and the people around you can instill in you, that the communities that we build can have this, that we can't rely on the state to educate us as a community and our children and our generations, and to take a leaf out of our parents and our ancestors' pages and say, how do they navigate this world? Because you know, sometimes it's easy to forget that that they too had similar struggles, if not harder.
Agreed. And also, Hodan, just to add, you're doing Hoya proud. I'm sure she's enjoying this much. Sophie, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Not really. I mean, I homeschool my daughter now. I gave in, I caved, and I've been homeschooling for about 3 years now. And it's a much more comfortable experience than sending her to regular state school. She's so happy. She has blossomed so much. She's gone from being this scared, mousy little child to this amazing young woman. I'm so proud of her, and I think that taking her out of an environment where she was being bullied for who she was, and just letting her be herself, it's allowed her to flourish. And it also means that I can teach her whatever I want, which is amazing. And she can read whatever she wants. She can ask questions without fear of judgments, without the fear of prevent. And obviously homeschooling is a luxury and a privilege, and most people do not have that luxury and privilege. To be able to stay at home with your child and teach them is a luxury that very few women have. But it's been an amazing experience, and it would be so nice if we were able to, you know, have homeschooling groups for some of our children who are not happy at school, because it feels so unjust to send children to school where not only are they not learning anything that they can relate to or that they can see themselves in and that will benefit them in their future, but they're also getting bullied while they're experiencing this. It seems like such a waste of their youth.
Thank you all so much for sharing. And what you were saying just then, Sophie, really reminded me of like how important that early phase of life is. You know, as a child going to school, how open to the world you are and how open to influence you are, and like how malleable your mind and your heart are, and like actually you can have experiences that, you know, remind you that you're trusted, that you're cared for, that you're loved, you're in a loving environment, and that you have agency, and that you're important and you're valued and your voice matters. Or you can have the opposite, and you know, these things happening in a young age can just really stunt a child's capacity and potential for just being the beautiful soul that they are and that they're destined to be. And I loved like the connections to ancestors as well, Hodan. So thank you for like reminding us that we are interconnected with these threads, and like, you know, we never experience these things alone. We experience them in community, in like this horizontal community, but also like a vertical community of like, you know, so much of Islam and like the passing down of tradition of Islam has to do with sacrifices and the love of ancestors who helped create like the early Islam and the early Islamic traditions, and just honoring our ancestors and saying thank you to them. And another tangent thought that came while we were talking about safe spaces was like, for me, I feel like the only space that feels like a safe space, which in physical senses I guess isn't, but like sajda and like putting my head to the ground and reconnecting with this earth and this soil that we come from, and just coming before God and like humbling myself and putting my ego to the ground, and how that is like one of the closest things to like safety, or like, and you know, of course there's the stories of people who've been brutally murdered in sajda, and you know, physically there's like elements, but I was just thinking about what is sanctuary, what is safety, what is a place of being where you feel comfortable and safe. And yeah, I think there was a lot to unpack in that notion of safety, and what does it mean? What does it mean for a soul in a physical body just trying to like do this life on this planet? And yeah, connecting back to education, I was wondering like what your relation with like Islam and education might be, or like how it might be a compass for us, or like spirituality. You know, how do you feel about education, and like how does spirituality inform how you feel about education?
I mean, we are the nation of Iqra, you know, the first proclamation of revelation being an instruction to read. So I think it runs through our entire identity, or it should do. And I think sometimes there's education and then there's knowledge, or like there's information and then there's knowledge. So people can acquire and have letters after their name or ijazas after their name, and not really embody the knowledge that they are privileged to hold. And I think we've, you know, and then in terms of safety and stuff, we often, every few months or years, it seems that we have these conversations of like spiritual abuse, and people who are in learned, you know, men who are in learned positions of authority, and using the knowledge that they've been blessed with as a position to then mistreat the people around them. And I think that it's really important to understand that sometimes those two things don't mean the same thing. It's you have to embody that. And it's, you know, I think some of the Sahaba that we read about didn't really have much hifz, memorization of the Quran, but they applied what they knew. And I think that's the honoring of that, and not demeaning people. Whereas today it's like, oh, my son is a hafid and so-and-so is a hafid. And what does that mean? What does it mean? What does it translate into their, you know, behavior and the culture that they reinforce? And what does means little when you see some of the actions that people do in the name of so-and-so's writing off bad behavior, people who would have, you know, particularly women, raped women, etc. And it's like, oh, it doesn't matter because he's a this, or it doesn't matter because, you know, he says that, or he's a scholar, or he's a this. And I think that's, while we are the nation of Iqra, we're also the nation of like ittaqillah as well, because really, you know, a lot of fear Allah people with the knowledge that Allah has given us, and it is a privilege to be able to access knowledge. And I think we can have conversations about accessibility of knowledge. We can have conversations around how we have very few places where we can enter the mosque as women. We can, you know, and then if you do enter the mosque as a woman and you happen to be an Asian or Arab woman, good luck, because some of us are Black women who are still outside the door, who are not being allowed into certain, you know, spaces, or treated badly when we're in there, or people who are being asked to, oh, really, you Muslim, read some Quran for me, prove your Islam in a mosque. people who are being violated in masajid for their ethnicity, for their color of their skin, for their race, effectively. So there's all the stuff about access to knowledge. There's all the stuff about people who are disabled. Can they enter the mosque? Having, wheelchair access, having khutbahs done in sign language, having, all of these things are conversations we can have, but knowledge as such is fundamental to who we are.
Yeah, I would just add, I agree with that, and I would add that, for me, we hear lots of stories about, Muslim girls being forced to do this and forced to do that and forced to madrasas, and my experience was actually the complete opposite. So I grew up in such a way that I didn't even know that people who wore hijab were the same religion as me when I was younger. I grew up in such a way that I didn't know anything about deen or religion, and then I married a Hafiz who told me. I started learning before that. But for me, it's about bypassing gatekeepers and actually developing your own relationship with the Quran. I think that's so important for all of us, especially in this age where there's so much rhetoric, there's all this, discourse, and there's so much pressure when you're from a marginalized community to engage with it or comment on it or have a reaction to everything. And I think sometimes the best way to seek knowledge is to step away from who we're perceived as the perceived knowledge givers and actually just do the work yourself, engage with the Quran.
I feel like I agree so strongly with both of you, and I think it's interesting because I feel like we're in this. Well, probably not in this stage where I've always been this way, but I feel like a lot of times we are encouraged to think about knowledge as just another form of capital that you can accumulate and you can have to really say something about yourself and your status and how people should treat you and how important you are, and really just feed your ego. And I think, that's why I really think it is so important to go back to what Hodan, what you were saying about like, what is the purpose of knowledge that doesn't change us, and like, and why are we so proud of ourselves? But I think it's also interesting that we, I think as like Muslim communities, maybe in the UK or in the West, like that we do place so much, or often I think can place so much on like secular institutions where we get degrees and like I have such and such degree and I have a PhD and I have, like, okay, fine, cool, but also like, what is like, why are we putting so much emphasis on that? And like, what does that say about what we've come to value or how we've come to value ourselves, on what basis we value our knowledge as important? And even like that whole thing of kind of like, oh, the Quran is right when it says this thing because my degree showed me da-da-da-da, rather than kind of working from the other premise and going, the things I'm learning are right because the Quran, do you know what I mean? I think we're sort of, again, that internalization of secularism, I think, is really present in the ways that we think about knowledge. But yeah, I think also that thing about it being a form of capital is really interesting, and it makes me feel like I think there's a lot we also have to do like on our own in terms of like really asking ourselves like how much is my knowledge changing me, and if it's not changing me, I think this, it's that thing of like hold yourself to account before you are held to account. And I think it is scary to me that people can accumulate so much like fiqh and knowledge of like the rules and the jurisprudence, but if they can't just be an ethical and kind person, I have big question marks around what that means. And I remember reading, I'm not sure exactly who said it, so I don't want to misquote it, but it was this idea that if you knew your life was going to end in a week, none of us would go, oh, I need to go learn all the fiqh that there is yet to learn, I need to go like read up all the books. Instead, we would probably be very concerned about our character and the relationships we've had with people, and maybe seeking someone's forgiveness or saying sorry, or being kind to the people that we love. And how that's actually really interesting, because obviously we were told that the Prophet ﷺ has the best of characters. It's not, that this was something that was really emphasized to us. And I think if knowledge isn't changing our character, then that's just a question for us to grapple with ourselves, really. And I say that as somebody who, has gone through secular institutions that are deemed to be prestigious, and really thought a lot of myself because of it, and kind of had to really unlearn and think like, but what do I know that will benefit me after this life? Like, what do I know? When I stand in the court of Allah, what he's not going to care. Like, sorry, we like pull out that BA. And so I think I think it's really important for us to just grapple with that on our own as well.
Sophie, I wonder, like, is there anything that you wanted to add or talk about in terms of spirituality and education?
I actually just wanted to add that there was something that Suhaiymah says in her essay, and I may have completely misunderstood it, so I'm really sorry if so. But I love that she was saying that, you know, she kind of went back to the roots, went back to the basics, and decided to question everything apart from Allah. And I just really loved that. That reminded me of a documentary about Imam Ghazali, who had a kind of, he had, I think, a crisis of faith, a crisis of reality, basically. And he went back to the roots and he questioned absolutely everything. And he built up this amazing, you know, certainty of faith. I just think for education in general, knowledge in general, what Suhaiymah said in her essay was absolutely perfect. That should be the basis, that we should all do that with everything that we learn. Question absolutely everything and take Allah as our starting point.
Thank you all so much. It's just wonderful and beautiful to listen to you. And something that came up in my mind was like this quote by Sufi poet Bulleh Shah, and he says something along the lines of like, you can tear down, obviously translated into woolly English, you can tear down a mosque, you can tear down a temple, but never tear down someone's heart, because that's where God themselves lives. And it just makes me think of like the mosque as an institution, and also like as in like, you know, the books and like the studying and the knowledge. It's like you can tear all of that down, but like never tear down someone's heart, because that's the true essence of God themselves. And I think it's such a beautiful reminder, like the things that you guys have explored. And I feel like we're just starting to like get into like the really interesting conversation around the time we've got to wrap up. So I'm just going to invite anybody else in the chat who'd like to ask questions to any of the panelists or all of them. Please do, and maybe we can start on some of the things that have been asked. So Sabeena, you did sort of touch on this a little bit. I don't know if you want to add anything or the next question, but around what were some of the ways you created a safe space for contributors?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I'm not sure that I actively did, and perhaps that was something, you know, with hindsight, I could say I could have done that better. I think for me, it was about protecting their words and making sure that they weren't, you know, edited to fit a particular narrative. But since the publication of the book and since it's developed, and, you know, people have asked me questions about, you know, who might be in the book or who might be missing, you know, I think it's hard, and I can't pretend to be, you know, well equipped to have, you know, curated that space. How easy is it, as we mentioned throughout, you know, the session, to actually really have a safe space? But I hope that you know, that I tried my best in my interactions with each individual contributor to make them feel that that their words were valued and would be protected in the anthology, and that was the best that I personally could do.
Can I just jump on that as well? I feel like sometimes the kind of responses to a book like this as well really just say more about the context, that, you know, there's so much that you can't do in one anthology. Imagine if there was 100 anthologies written only by Muslim women. Like, I think sometimes I think because there's such a scarcity, we also desire so much to see ourselves and so much to like see everybody, and think, yeah, that is difficult to ask out of one anthology. But I think, mashallah, that you did do a good job. And I mean, I think that we should never be, I think, striving to be like, this is the finished end now, like we've represented Muslim women, done. And I think that's kind of the point. It's the start of a conversation. It's not the end of anything.
What she said.
Yeah, pretty much. Like one thing won't be able to like represent this perfect universe in which, like, you know, we've done everything that's good and just and perfect and right and pious, and do you know what I mean? Because like that just to me sounds like heaven. That's just like, it's not what we're here to try our best and to use the resources that we've got to create what we can, and, you know, to aspire to, you know, like, you know, wisdoms and teachings that, you know, but like also just being kind on ourselves and just like knowing that we've created something out of what we've had, and like where we can be one ripple in this like in a wider like body of water, and like, you know, you don't have to be the whole ocean. And, you know, like, sorry, going back to water metaphors from the poetry workshop that Suhaiymah did with Civic Square a few weeks ago, but you know that there is so much beauty in being a ripple. And like something I've really enjoyed about this conversation is like returning as well to like the personal sphere and like the interactions and the relationships. Whereas like with social media and like with all this like zoomed out stuff, it can feel like, oh, I've got this whole thing that I need to do. But like as a human being with the agency that we've got and the, like, you know, the space that we've got, like something beautiful that you guys have shared has been like, you know, it's the beauties in and the work is in like the everyday interactions. We've got another question from Charlotte that says, what small change would make the biggest difference to keeping Muslim women safe?
I think I don't have an answer to that. I'm just going to preface what I'm about to say. But I think I've just been thinking through this conversation, two things which maybe relate to this. One is that I think there's ideological and material safety, and I think they're completely connected, but they are distinct. And I think when we think about this book, it might not materially make us safer, but it has ideologically created a safe space. And one of the things I wanted to say about that earlier was that one of the things I enjoyed the most about this was that there were some essays I disagreed with, and I didn't feel this deep sense of anxiety, which I usually do when any Muslim in the public sphere does anything. If I disagree, I just feel like, oh, this is so stressful because this is a narrative that exists. But because it was in this book, where there are many, many other essays, I didn't feel that stress. And so maybe to relate this to that question and to this question of safety, it's also just like there needs to be like, I think something about like quantity, like there just needs to be more of stuff for you to be able to feel like you can actually have the space to say some of the things that are difficult to say. And for me, a lot of that question of safety, and I think again, more ideologically than materially specifically, is just that if I didn't always have to exist under the knowledge of a white gaze, like what you were talking about as well, Sophie, earlier, then I think that and the spaces where I don't have to is where I feel most able to breathe. So I don't know if there's a small change to create that. Like, I think it's a sort of like end white supremacy. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just thinking about ways that practically, like teachers and stuff, like if you are conscripted to work for the state to surveil Muslim students and whether if you're a doctor or whatever, I think we do need to think about ways to really like subvert and not comply with that system, like not comply with being the criminalizing hand of the state. I know people are scared to do that, but remember that if we do it collectively and if more and more people are willing to do it, then it, you know, that is the only way we're going to resist. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think what you just said, I agree with that. And just as an example, which is not related to Muslim women, it is related to Muslim women because Palestinian communities include, you know, many Muslim women, but the protests of people not working in the arms factories in Britain and not loading you know, I think people protesting and doing things like that. So actively disrupting and saying, I'm seeing this, you know, genocide taking place in front of me. What can I do as someone in Leeds or wherever these protests are happening, and not Leicester, I think it was one of them, not participating in that process. So that's one example. And I'll give a short sort of anecdote, story. There was a International Women's Day poetry event that I was invited to, and the space was in the event room, which was below a pub. So the only entrance to that space was you had to walk through the pub. As a visibly Muslim woman in the evening, let me just say, everyone stopped talking, and it was a very uncomfortable space. I wish there was another entrance and exit, but that was the only space. So already I'm feeling out of my usual environment. I don't, you know, for people who might be watching who don't know, Muslim women who are visibly Muslim women don't necessarily frequent British pubs as the norm. So and not often, you know, our hangouts. So I was downstairs, had to go downstairs and did this, read two poems which were very specifically related to International Women's Day. And one of them, actually, one was called Islamophobia, which I'd written years ago, commissioned by the Islamic Human Rights Commission. And the other one was the International Women's Day poem that I have been kind of using, reading in the last, since 2017 when I first wrote the first half of that. So I read those two poems only and came off the stage. And a Spanish woman stopped me, pulled me to one side and said, "Can I ask you a question?" I made the mistake of saying, "Yeah, sure," as I was about to leave. And it was in the corner as I was about to go back up the stairs to go exit via the pub again. And she said, "Why do you wear that thing on your head?" And I, and then I had to make a decision about how to respond, as we always do. There's like 3, 4, 5 different ways you can respond to that. And interrogating her and hearing her accent and finding out that she was Spanish and she lived in Spain, I discovered in that conversation of utter bigotry that many Muslim women live in her neighborhood, in the town that she comes from. And she sees a lot of hijabi sisters outside the school gates and is bothered by the fact that there's a lot of Muslim women in her neighborhood, and has never spoken to any of them, obviously, being a bigot racist, but decided to ask me this question. So a long conversation ensued. She took up a lot of my evening. It was very stressful, very bigoted, but I challenged her on everything for the sake of the sisters that she has to now go back to, because I could have said what I wanted to say and leave and handled that very differently. But understanding that there's other women, I felt like morally obligated to have a conversation that was very thorough so that she can go back and not cause further harm to those sisters in a remote town in Spain. When the conversation finished, because the event had my Twitter handle, come and see my mentions, my DMs, actually, private messages of so many women, white, British women, who had walked past up and down the stairs and the corner where this very vigorous conversation was happening, saying to me, all of them without fail, I heard that really bigoted Spanish woman saying all the horrible things that she said to you. "I'm very sorry. Are you okay?" Not one of them stopped at the time when she heard what was being said and stopped and interjected and said, "What the heck are you talking about?" Not one. But I got about 20 DMs from people who'd seen and heard everything, who wanted to tell me afterwards. And that is for the person who asked the question, that is one of the things you can do on a practical day-to-day level. When you're on the tube and you see people being abusive to Muslim women, or, making snide comments, when your colleagues are being discriminatory against someone else, when you have had an interview and you've been on a panel and the young woman who was being interviewed was a hijabi or brown, black person, someone marginalized, and you hear those comments in the workplace, you challenge them there and then. You don't come to people afterwards and say, "I'm sorry somebody spat at you and slapped you or harassed you or was rude to you or called you all these names." Don't come to me afterwards and tell me, "I heard them call you the N-word and I said nothing and I'm really sorry." Because great that you feel bad, but I would have preferred if you manifested that feeling into actions and actually disrupted the point at which the abuse and the harm was taking place. That would have been much better. And that's a way of making, as well as creating the spaces like you were talking about, Suhaiymah, earlier. I also believe that I gave that story as an example that so many people experience that. So many people will have someone come up to you afterwards and go, "Are you all right, love? Are you all right? I saw that horrible man do that to you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I don't need that. I don't need that. I needed you to challenge that racist when it was happening. So that's one take home for people, because it seems to be a very British thing.
We haven't been cut off yet, which I'm really grateful for. I wonder, do you guys just want to wrap up and finish, or do you want to answer more questions?
I'm fine.
Fine, okay. Yeah, that was just so important. Thank you so much for sharing that story, Hodan, because that's it. It's like, I don't need you to say sorry afterwards. I need you to act when you see something happening. And it's like, what is the safe space? The safe space is like the everyday interactions, right? It's like the everyday, it's the ordinary things that you might overlook. And it's that interjection of no, I have agency, I can do something, and using your privilege currency to interject and to take up that space and use your voice. So thank you so much for sharing that story. What do you think is the best way to have conversations around Islam and Islamophobia in a predominantly white working environment? I struggled with this, and I just decided to, well, sorry, I'm answering because I know it's an exhausting topic, and like, yeah, I don't know. I think there's like a thing of wanting to share as much as you can to try and open up someone's like experiences and the conversations they're able to have. But then there's only like so much before you're met with resistance and something that feels quite exhausting and makes assumptions about you. I don't know if anybody else has got something they want to share about conversations around Islam and Islamophobia in a predominantly white working environment.
I would just say, like, remember, it's not your job. You don't have to. You can. You don't have to. And I think I would say, really remember, you can burn out so quickly, and that's your workplace. You know what I mean? You have to be there a lot, and that's a lot of your time. So I would just say, only if there's a person that if it feels like a genuine interaction, if it feels like this is something you want to be talking about, do it. But I feel like if it becomes that feeling that's like, oh God, like I need to say something, the onus is on me, like I feel already sick and anxious, and that just remember that that's not your job, and you really don't have to. That's all I would say, really, because I think it can just, yeah, you're not being paid double time. Do you know what I mean? You're not being paid to also educate and raise consciousness. So like, yeah, but I really empathize and understand how difficult that can be. Yeah, sorry.
And another question is, I don't know if anybody wants to add anything, please interrupt me. I thought I'd quickly get through the next one in case we get cut off. I think Muslim women are often asked the same questions repeatedly. What one question do you never get asked that you wish you would be? It's an interesting question, thank you.
Wow. That's a deep question. I don't know. If I'm being perfectly honest, this is going to sound like so wrong saying this and very hard to believe, but I'm an introvert. I don't ask me any questions. I don't want to be, but if, yeah, I think something outside, like how are you today? How about that? You know, how about questions that acknowledge your humanity beyond the surface? Things like, you know, when you're in conversations, rather than someone just finding the Muslim thing. I'm also a community mediator, and I remember many times when I've been in mediation sessions where someone will be talking to the other colleague, is usually two that would do the mediation when I used to do it, and they would be talking to the other person who wasn't a visible Muslim woman. It was usually a pairing of different people from different demographics. And they would talk and talk and talk to them and ignore me until something about Muslims or Islam came up. And then they would turn around and go, you know, and they'd look at me, suddenly it's like, you're now. So how about, like, I think I would invert that in my answer and say, not doing that and asking questions like you would ask any other person. The things that any other human being that you would ask those questions. Don't just look to us when something happens and you think that it fits within, like the questioner said, the questions that Muslim women get asked often. If they not ask those questions, then you'll find that there's a whole array of other humanizing ways that you can interact with Muslim women by treating them as human beings, which is what we are, believe it or not.
What she said.
I love the question.
I'd agree with that. That's, you know, it reminds me of one time I was in the school playground when my daughter was little, and somebody had asked, you know, a group of mums, what did everyone do over the Christmas holidays? And so I just said, oh, you know, just watched the EastEnders Christmas special, sat around, ate with family. And then all of the non-Muslim mums that were around me were like, oh my God, that's what we do. That's what we did. We watched EastEnders and just ate food with family. There's nothing else to do. Like, and it's that, isn't it? It's just, you know, not always looking for the Muslim angle or the oppressed angle or the marginalized angle, but sometimes just, you know, I find as well, my actual passion, you know, I've edited or written for 2 non-fiction pieces, but my actual passion is fiction. I've always wanted to write fiction, you know, and it's I find for me as a Muslim woman, it's hard to do that because people just want, you know, they want you to write about your identity. And I've wanted to write about my identity, but now I want to move past that and write other things. So for me, it's like, oh, what are the other things you're interested in? That's always nice.
Yeah, I would just echo all of that. And I think also just, I feel like sometimes I think that thing of going back to like just that we're also like, you know, like intimately complex people. Like we also, I don't know, just like ask me about love, ask me about like what do I care about, ask me about like, you know, like what's my opinion on, you know what I mean? Just I think I feel like, so like you just said, Sabeena, like you've always wanted to write fiction. I mean, how's that not? I feel like that's just something you care about. I feel like it just made me think about the fact that, yeah, I think so often when you're just like, these are the topics that you talk about, it's kind of like, does anyone even know me? Like, does anyone even know what I like, what gets me excited? Like, what do I find really funny? Like, does anyone know what my sense of humor is? And like, I think those are the, yeah, I mean, it's just, yeah, it's silly to, I don't know what the question would be, but it's like, just yeah, what Hodan said, like, just treat us like humans.
Yeah, yeah, just treat us like humans. We are humans, and yeah, just the basic respect and trust and care and kindness, and just be cool. I think that's all the questions, and we haven't been cut off. So I just want to thank you all so much for your incredibly like profound and wonderful like perspectives, anecdotes, stories. Like it's been beautiful to, you know, with reading the essays, to like hear from you and to learn so much more about like the complexities and the fluidities and just like hear your exchange with each other as well. And I really recommend everyone in the chat, please buy the book. It's brilliant. And it's so necessary. It's cathartic. It's just inspiring. It's incredible. I'm struggling with words today, so thank you for being patient with me. But it's a brilliant book, and yeah, please get it. I think Nikki's put up a discount as well from This Is Book Love. So yeah, do get your copy, and yeah, just keep trying to be kind and nice to people in the small, everyday, wonderful ways that you can. Thank you so much, Suhaiymah, Sophie, Hodan, and Sabeena.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, my heart is just so full with everything that everyone shared. And I think when Zoya was asking Hodan about her essay, Waiting to Exhale, and I'm like, and Hodan replied, who gets to breathe? And I feel this, you know, this book, let me just hold it up for those of you, if you haven't seen it, it really gives us room as Muslim women to breathe. And I think when Zoya was kind of reading the book and prepping questions, and you know, she'd kind of sent loads of like provocations, and I was like, there's so much in there to unpack. But I think also, you know, part of me, you know, part of the publicity was like, oh, you know, these are stories which challenge the usual stereotypes. But I think I'm like the mum or the mussy in this call, probably the oldest on the call. But I feel like if I'd read this book as a young person, as a teenager, I'd be a different person today, and it will kind of give me this kind of autonomy, this agency, this level of empowerment. And I think, you know, I was making a few notes. Shaheen was busy live tweeting, thank you, Shaheen, from MFest. But I think, you know, Hodan said about Iqra and how knowledge is fundamental to who we are. And I feel by sharing these stories, these experiences, some of them like absolutely brilliant, some of them quite harrowing. So some of them like, you're like, oh, you know, I can really resonate and relate to that. And I think it's going back to what I was saying, you know, why we host books like these and, you know, events like these, because I want to go kind of beyond what books are and how they affect people on an everyday level. And we've got another Beyond Books event on Monday, nothing to do with Muslim women, but there's a quote from the book. It's called On Time and Water. It's an Icelandic writer who's writing about climate change, and he's kind of written a monument, a letter to the future. And I feel as though this little paragraph really resonates in terms of what, you know, cut from the same cloth, you know, what experiences our sisters have just shared. And the kind of quote is, this monument is to acknowledge we know what is happening and we know what needs to be done. Only you will know if we did it. Every time I read this paragraph, it really I get goose pimples, knowing the fact that I feel like in cut from the same cloth is we know what the experiences are, but sometimes we don't share them. And it's like, by having these stories out there, by having them published and shared, and I feel as though it will change future generations. It will make us like a better, you know, I think, Suhaiymah, you spoke about, you know, what is safety, and you say, you know, you can't be safe as an individual. You can only be safe in unity and community. And I feel having, you know, experiences that you shared in your essays kind of add to those safe spaces, because, you know, we don't have safe spaces, but the more we share kind of these common experiences and folk can resonate and think, yeah, I'm not alone, it's so powerful. So I can only just say my heart is so full from this conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Zoya, for hosting this conversation. You know, Suhaiymah, Sabeena, Sophie and Hodan. A special shout out to the mums on the call, Sabeena, and I know Sophie, your little one, has got toothache. Thank you for joining us, because we weren't sure if you were going to be able to stay on with us. I've taken up loads of time. Shaheen, I don't know if you've got some closing words you'd like to share too.
Just a couple of things, like, yeah, I was trying my best to live tweet it, and there's loads I've missed out, but just absorbing everything that everyone was saying. So apologies if there's any mistakes there, but there's so many beautiful things, so many rich things for us to sit with and just reflect on. I think Nikki named a few of them, but just thinking about how we've all been gaslit for the first 20 odd years of our life, kind of scary. And it made me think that, like, the word education comes from the Latin educare, I think, which means to bring out what's within. And if you think about the Islamic principle of knowing yourself and knowing your Lord, your creator, our education system is quite the opposite of that. It kind of imposes on us a whole different set of ideals or you know, systems of being. So there's so much there. And yes, make sure you get yourself the book, get your libraries to order it in for yourself and for everyone you know. And on that whole thing of, you know, writing and telling our stories, MFest also has a short story competition, which is open at the moment. The deadline is very soon, in a few days, but please get your entries in. We would love to just see what you're writing for yourself, you know, for your communities, for your families, for your friends. Just think of it as, you know, a lot of what Sabeena was saying and the other amazing speakers were saying in the session. So we've also got one more session next week, and got a conversation on land justice, and a workshop on hip hop and sci-fi writing. Can't wait for that. And yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to Nikki, thank you to Civic Square, all our speakers, the audience, and the amazing questions. Wasi, I loved that question, that was brilliant. And yeah, a big thanks from everyone at MFest, and Maslaha. Thanks a lot, guys.
Oh, I've done it again. I've muted myself. Yes, just to end on that, adding my thanks to everybody, and to take a line from the earlier conversation, just be kind to yourselves, and where we do see injustice, speak up, and yes, share, cut from the same cloth. Take care. Assalamu alaikum, everybody.